We've now wrapped up the most challenging query so far, which was the get active years range and the get age range queries. The difficulty curve is not going to let up though. We're going to move on to what might be the most challenging query that we're going to write overall, which is the search artist query. So I'm going to open up this file. Let's take a look at it. So this is definitely a pretty hefty chunk of work. There's a lot of moving pieces around this query, and so we're going to tackle this in a series of steps. Okay, so we're not going to do the entire thing in one go. We're going to do it in a series of steps. The purpose of this query right here is to populate the result set that we see inside this application right here. So if I click on Upstart Music, we'll see the search criteria on the left, and in the center right now it says no records found. So it's our job to write in a query that's going to return an actual list of artists inside of here that match up with the search criteria on the left-hand side. So if we take a look at the search criteria again, you'll see that we can search for an artist's name, the age range, the years active, and a sort by as well. So whatever result set we get, we can then sort it in some fashion. So just keep that in mind as we start to look through some of the comments inside of here. Let's walk through the arguments list that's going to be passed to this query, and then we'll talk about exactly what the query is going to be expected to return back to the rest of the application. The first argument to this is the criteria object. Criteria is an object with a name, age, and years active property. So these are kind of like the filtering criteria that we need to use. So when we when we type in a string like a artist name, we're going to need to make sure that we only find our artist with this very particular name. The second argument is the sort property, which is going to be the property to sort the results by. And so that's what's being selected by the sort by dropdown right here. So users should be able to sort by artist name, age, and albums released. Now we're going to assume that this sort property right here is always going to go in ascending fashion. So you're always going to be sorting with a sort property of like 1, or like a sort value of 1. And when I'm talking about 1, if I open up my get age range query that we were just working on, I mean like this one right here. So we're going to call sort, and we're going to always pass in 1. We're just going to hard code it like that. You'll notice that the real challenge behind this sorting though is that we can specify different sort properties, but only one at any given time. So if we look back at the query we just wrote, we had been hard coding in to sort by age, right? Like that was hard coded. But this time around, we're saying that we want to be able to pass in a different sort property depending on what the user has selected. And so in practice, that means that we're going to have to make sure that this value right here, this key, like literally that key, will be whatever the sort property is. Okay? So if sort property is equal to, if we say sort property is equal to age, like so, we need to make sure that we end up having a statement that says age like that, just to be clear. All right, next is the offset and the limit. So the offset and limit again come down to pagination. Inside the application, you don't see it right now, but once we have a list of artists on here, you should see a little selector at the bottom stating whether or not you want to go to like the next page of search results. And so if a user clicks on this next page that's going to eventually pop up, the offset and the limit values here are going to change, and so we're going to need to return a different kind of window of results from our collection. Now the thing to notice about offset and limit right here are that they are using a little bit of ES6 code to default their values. Okay, so by default, if this function is called without an offset or a limit, they will be defaulted to 0 and 20. You don't have to change these two values right here. These are to kind of like for interface with the rest of the application. We shouldn't need to change the two values there at all. So that's an overview of the arguments list. Now, part of the real challenge here is not only getting all these different filter criteria and all these different query modifiers put together, but it is also the what we are expected to return from this query. So we are expected to return from this query a promise that resolves with the artist's the count of artists, the total count in the entire collection, not just in the result set, the offset, and the limit. Okay, let's talk about each of these properties. And notice that I added in an extra little comment here of exactly what the returned object should look like. So it's going to be an object with an all property, make sure you get that all in there, that will be the array of artists that was found, a count property, that is the total list or the total number of results inside of the result set, the offset, and the limit. The offset and the limit are just going to be the offset and the limit that get passed into this function. So we're not going to do any further calculation on these. We're just going to return them from this function as well. We're specifically returning them just because that's how this application was written. It was assuming, the app was written assuming that you would call this thing with the offset and limit, and the function would return that back to you. So it's just kind of an implementation detail. Okay. So definitely a lot of challenge here, a lot of very intricate moving pieces. For this first step, I want to do just I'm going to do this in multiple steps. So for this first step, what I would like you to do is write a query that will follow sort, offset, limit, options only. So do not worry about criteria yet. Oop. Okay. Handling this criteria object up here is going to be pretty darn complex, and there's another topic or two that we need to discuss before we actually handle the criteria. So for this first part of the exercise, don't worry about the criteria object. Just write a query that's going to sort our entire list of artists and then find an offset and limit from them. And then you'll need to also make sure that your promise or the thing that you return from this actual function follows this type of function signature right here. Okay, so that's where we're going to start for right now. Go ahead and give it a shot. Again, this is a really challenging problem right here, and I probably haven't even given you a super in-depth explanation of all the little different steps in here. So I encourage you to give it a good shot. Give it your best try. After you give it a shot, we'll come back, go over some solutions, and figure out how to approach this. Okay, so I'll see you in just a second.